I didn't throw anything away. I simply made it ready. I was preparing them, even if they didn't know it yet. The next day, I called a realtor. Not Gregory, Lisa's cousin. A different agency entirely. A woman named Annette who had no connection to my family and no reason to share information. We talked over tea. I told her I wasn't looking to sell. Just to assess options. She listened, nodded, didn't push. The moment I told her I wasn't in a rush, her demeanor changed. She treated me like a client. Not an aging woman being managed, but a person with resources and autonomy. That shift, I held on to that. Later that week, the messages from Donald began again. We need to talk about the house. I've scheduled a walkthrough, just preliminary. Lisa found a buyer. Very motivated. Cash offer. No pressure, of course. Every message came with a layer of pretense. Like they were doing me a favor. Like this was about helping me. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I packed. Not hurriedly. Not with bitterness. I packed with the care of someone closing a chapter properly. I folded linens. Donated old coats. Labeled keepsakes. I prepared the home for what it had always been, a place of origin. Not a prison. When I found the envelope with the deed to the Spanish cottage, I reread the note Russell had written. You're not done yet. He had known, even then, what I would need. Not just the space. Not just the autonomy. But the reminder. I wasn't done yet. A week later, I booked the flight. One way. Barcelona, then a train down the coast to the village near the house. I didn't tell the children. There was no need. They weren't asking the right questions, anyway. Not once had they said, "What do you want, Mom?" or, "Are you okay here?" They only asked what I planned to do with the house. Not whether I wished to stay in it. Only what use it could be put to. That told me everything. I scheduled a moving company to come quietly, midweek. Not to pack everything, just the items I chose. A few boxes of books. The blue china Russell's mother had left me. My quilts. The oil painting from the upstairs hallway, the one we bought on our anniversary trip to Nova Scotia. The movers were discreet and efficient. I didn't supervise. I sat in the living room and drank my tea. Each box sealed felt like a small breath of clarity. Later that evening, I wrote 3 letters. One to each of my children. I didn't scold. I didn't accuse. I simply said that I was taking some time away. That I needed space. That they needn't worry, I was safe, settled, and content. I left no forwarding address. I placed the letters on the hall table by the front door, tucked beneath the old porcelain bowl where I used to keep keys. Then I placed their childhood boxes, Jason's, Darlene's, Sarah's, neatly beside them. Each had a name written in black marker. Each was tied with a length of ribbon I found in Russell's desk drawer. I wanted them to understand it wasn't a tantrum. It was a conclusion. I left the house just after sunrise. The air was cool. The garden was still. The cat, now elderly and slow, had already been taken to a neighbor's home the day before. She'd been kind, the neighbor, and didn't ask many questions. Just nodded, said, "Good for you," and offered to keep the lavender alive. At the airport, I sat quietly with a pastry and a cup of strong coffee. No one looked at me twice. I liked that. Being invisible in a crowd was strangely soothing. The flight was uneventful. I dozed. I read. I looked out at the Atlantic and thought about how far away everything was becoming, not just in miles, but in weight. By the time I reached the village, the sun was low and warm against the white stone walls. The taxi driver dropped me at the edge of the narrow road. I had one suitcase and a small carry-on. That was all I needed. Everything else, the rest of it, belonged to a life I had already lived. The cottage stood just as the photographs had promised. Small, quiet, unpretentious. A blue door. Terracotta roof tiles. A low stone wall lined with rosemary and what looked like jasmine. The key, which Russell had hidden behind the photo of us in Venice, worked without hesitation. The door opened smoothly. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and sea salt. There was a note on the kitchen counter, left by the property manager. "Welcome," it read. "Fresh linens in the cupboard. Groceries delivered tomorrow. The hot water is reliable, but the bathroom window sticks. Let me know if you need anything." I didn't. I walked through the rooms slowly. 2 bedrooms. A small kitchen. A sitting room with a fireplace and wide windows that opened to a view of the coast. There was a faint sound of gulls. I opened the windows and stood there for a while, breathing it in. That first night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. No interruptions. No buzzing phone. No low-level dread pressing behind my eyes. The next morning, I made coffee and sat on the terrace. A neighbor passed by and waved. I waved back. We didn't speak. There was no need. Later, I walked to the village market and picked up a few things: bread, olives, soft cheese, a bottle of wine. The woman behind the counter smiled and said something in Spanish I didn't understand. I smiled back. I'd learn. I'd learn it all. Slowly, without pressure. By the 3rd day, the messages started coming. First Donald. A single text. "Mom, where are you?" Then another. "We came by the house. Everything's gone. Call me." Darlene's message was longer. Concern disguised as control. "I'm worried. You shouldn't be making big decisions alone. We need to talk about the house." Kathleen's in tears. Sarah didn't bother with pleasantries. "What the hell is going on? You've lost it. We need to fix this before it's too late." I turned off the phone. Let them stew in their confusion. Let them wonder where the power went. Let them sit, just once, in the silence they'd left me in. Later that evening, I pulled out the deed to the Spanish house. My name, clear as ever. Russell's signature at the bottom. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal and smiled. They had the house. But I had the home. A week passed before I turned my phone back on. I expected anger. Instead, I found desperation. Jason had emailed. "Please, Mom. Just tell us where you are. We're worried." Darlene had left a voicemail. Her voice trembled. "I didn't mean to make you feel unwanted. Please come home. Kathleen misses you. I miss you." Sarah had sent a text. "You've made your point. We didn't handle things well. But disappearing? This isn't fair." Fair. I nearly laughed. Fair was deciding your mother was no longer capable, without asking her. Fair was discussing my options like I wasn't in the room. I wrote back one sentence. "I am safe. I am content. Please respect my decision." I left it at that. I no longer needed to explain myself. I no longer needed their permission. The next few weeks passed quietly. I filled the rooms with soft light and quiet music. I bought a small table for the terrace, painted it blue. I cooked again, not for anyone else, but because I liked the way garlic smelled in a pan of olive oil. In the afternoons, I wrote. Not for anyone. Just for myself. Fragments of memory. Lists of truths I'd once ignored. I wrote about Russell, about the days when we used to walk through the neighborhood hand in hand, pretending we'd grow old in that house. I wrote about how love can get twisted, not broken, just rearranged, until it begins to feel like debt. I wrote about what it meant to be useful. And then, about what it meant to be free. The children wrote less as time passed. Their messages became shorter. Then sporadic. Then, nothing. I didn't mind. I still thought of them, of course. I still loved them. But I no longer waited. The house in Spain wasn't grand, but it was enough. More than enough. It was space. It was dignity. It was mine. I woke each day without obligation. I went to bed each night without resentment. Sometimes, when the breeze came through the open windows just right, I thought I could hear Russell's voice. "You did it, Lily." Yes, I did. It was in the second month that Laura called. Not a text. Not a voicemail. A real call. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I sat on the edge of the bed, window open, the soft clink of wind chimes outside the only other sound. "Mom?" Her voice was smaller than I remembered. Not weak, just unfamiliar, like it hadn't been used to speak to me in a long time. She waited, but I said nothing. I wanted to know what she'd say if the silence held. "I didn't know it was this bad," she said. "I didn't realize we'd made you feel." She trailed off, searching for something she couldn't name. I spoke calmly. "Unnecessary." A beat of silence. "Yes," she said quietly. We sat in the silence together, her on one end of the world, me on the other, held apart by years of entitlement disguised as care. I could hear a clock ticking faintly in the background of her call. It made me think of Russell's study. The clock he wound every Sunday night. Still on the mantel at home, at the old home. Laura cleared her throat. "Jason's worried sick," she said. "Sarah's furious, of course, but that's just how she is. You know that." I didn't answer. "And me. I suppose I'm ashamed." There it was. The word I didn't expect. Not guilt. Not regret. Shame. I softened, but not much. "You all acted like I didn't exist anymore. Like I was just excess." "I know," she said. "We thought we were helping." "Helping. They always say that." "We had dinner," she went on, "about a week after you left. Sat around your table like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The house felt wrong. Empty. Cold. I imagined them there. Looking at each other across the dining table, plates full, mouths empty of anything real to say." "What did you talk about?" I asked. She hesitated. "At first, the sale. Logistics. Then, about you. About how none of us had asked the right questions. Jason said he felt like he'd been trying to manage you instead of understand you." I stayed silent. "Darlene cried," she added. "And Sarah said she was angry because she didn't know how to feel helpless. She thought taking charge was love." There it was. Their version of affection, control. I said, "You were all very sure of yourselves. We were wrong." That quiet admission loosened something in my chest. Not completely. Just enough. "I'm not coming back," I said gently. "At least not in the way you hope." I figured. "I'm not angry anymore," I added. "But I don't need to explain myself to you. Not now." "I know." A long pause, then she said, "The garden's a mess." I nearly smiled. We let it get wild before, too. Russell always meant to prune the roses and never did. Jason tried, she said with a laugh that cracked in the middle. It ended badly. I imagined him, clumsy and impatient, wielding shears like weapons. Russell would have winced. Laura grew quiet. I want to visit. Not to drag you back or convince you. Just to see you. To do what? I asked, not unkindly. Sit on your porch. Drink whatever you're drinking these days. Not say anything if you don't want me to. I pictured her there, the youngest of the three, the one who had always been torn between following and resisting her siblings. She used to bring me flowers when she was little, dandelions pressed into my palm like treasure. I'll think about it, I said. She seemed to understand that was as close to a yes as she'd get. After she hung up, I sat for a while with my hands in my lap. The breeze lifted the curtains and the sun made patterns on the floorboards. I thought about how hard it had been to leave. How much harder it would have been to stay. I still checked the mail each morning. The property manager forwarded any official documents, and occasionally, there were letters. One came from Jason. Handwritten. The envelope was plain, the return address crossed out. Mom. I've been reading some of Dad's old journals. Didn't know he kept any. Found them in a box in the attic. There's one from the year I got suspended. He wrote about how hard that was for both of you. But also how proud he was of how you handled it. Said you held the family together without cracking. I didn't know he noticed that stuff. But I guess he did. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I didn't mean to make you feel pushed aside. I thought I was stepping up. I thought Dad would want me to take the lead. I didn't realize how much of a leader you'd already been all along. Wherever you are, I hope you feel like yourself again. You deserve that. Love. Jason. I read it twice, then tucked it into the drawer beside my bed. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a beginning. Some mornings, I'd walk down to the village and sit at the cafe near the church. They served a strong cortado and never minded if I stayed too long. The owner, a man named Matteo, always greeted me with a smile. He spoke English gently and slowly. His wife made pastries. I'd learned to say, thank you, in Spanish, and she always beamed when I got it right. I was learning. At the little library by the square, I borrowed novels in translation. I started journaling. Then sketching. I wasn't good at it, but I liked the sound the pencil made on paper. I didn't need to become a different person here. I just needed to return to someone I hadn't seen in a long time. A few days later, I received a box, forwarded from the old address. Inside was a photo album. Not a new one. An old one I thought had been lost. Jason's handwriting was on a note tucked inside. Thought you might want this back. I found it in the linen closet behind Dad's coats. I opened it carefully. Photos from years ago. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. Russell in flannel. Laura in pigtails. Me, always behind the cake, behind the camera, behind everything. Except here. There was one photo I'd forgotten, from a trip we took to Maine. I was in front of the lens, sun in my eyes, a wide grin on my face. Russell had written on the back, Lily, sunlight. I closed the album and placed it on the shelf beside my writing desk. That night, I took a walk along the shore. The tide was low. The breeze was warm. I passed couples, tourists, a few children with sticks chasing the surf. I wasn't lonely. I was alone. They are not the same. At home, I lit a candle and made tea. I sat in the quiet and realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anything. Not for an apology. Not for a gesture. Not even for the past to make sense. I had lived a good life. I had raised children. I had loved deeply. I had given everything I had, willingly. But now, I was giving to myself. I wrote that in my journal before bed. Today, I did not ask for permission. And no one expected me to. Then I turned off the light, listened to the sea, and slept, undisturbed, unclaimed, at peace. It was 3 months before Darlene wrote. Not a letter. Not a phone call. A long email, unpunctuated in places, typed in haste or anxiety or maybe just the emotional shorthand of someone used to getting answers quickly. Mom. I know you don't want to hear from me. I know I said things I shouldn't have. I've played our last few conversations over in my head more times than I can count. I keep hearing my own voice, saying things like, transition, or, you can help with Kathleen. Like I was offering you a kindness instead of asking you to disappear. I didn't mean it that way. Or maybe I did. I don't know. It felt practical. Logical. I thought we were being efficient. But all we were doing was excusing ourselves from the harder truth, that we hadn't really seen you in years. You became this background figure. Reliable. Predictable. Always there. Always helping. Always smoothing things over. We counted on that. Counted on you. And then, when you needed something, not even help, just space, we responded like it was a negotiation. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. Kathleen asked about you last week. She found one of your old letters in her drawer. The one where you told her to plant something every spring, even if it didn't bloom. She cried. I don't know if that matters. Maybe it's too late. But I wanted you to know we haven't forgotten you. We just forgot how to love you the way you deserve. Please write if you ever feel ready. Darlene. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I didn't know how to feel, but because the emotion that rose up was quieter than I expected. Not relief. Not even forgiveness. Just a kind of breath. A moment of quiet acknowledgement. I didn't write back. Not yet. Instead, I folded laundry. I swept the terrace. I watched the sun move through the house in the late morning, making patterns on the tile. I made soup from scratch and set the table for one. I lit a candle and ate slowly. I didn't need an audience to feel real. That weekend, I took the train north to a neighboring town for the local market. It wound through narrow alleys and stone courtyards, stalls blooming with olives and handmade soaps and long loaves of bread wrapped in linen. I didn't buy much, just a jar of honey and a block of goat cheese. There was a woman there, older, maybe 70, who sold hand-dyed fabrics. We exchanged greetings in clumsy bits of both languages, laughed over our shared misunderstandings, and sat for a moment under her awning. She offered me tea from a small thermos and said, slowly but clearly, no one here cares what you were before. Only who you are now. I wrote that down in my notebook when I got home. She was right. There was no currency here in past usefulness. No one weighed you by how many casseroles you made, how many schedules you remembered, how many children you raised. They looked you in the eye. That was enough. Some evenings I'd walk past the chapel on the hill. It overlooked the bay and rang its bell every day at 7. The sound echoed gently, not like a call, but a reminder, time is moving, quietly, with or without your permission. One night, I lingered there, watching the sky shift. I remembered the first time I stood in that garden back home, newly married, unsure of the soil, unsure of everything. Russell had taken my hand and said, "We'll learn this place." We did. And now, I was learning again. The house began to feel like mine in new ways. I rearranged the shelves. Hung a few local paintings. I planted lavender in pots along the edge of the terrace, just as I had outside our kitchen window back home. It took to the sunlight quickly, blooming in soft bursts of purple. Sometimes, I sat on the steps and wrote letters I never sent. One to Russell, one to each child. I didn't write to be heard. I wrote to remember. To remember who I'd been before I became a role. I wrote about how no one prepares you for the slow disappearance, the way your name becomes Mom, and your identity becomes an extension of other people's needs. I wrote about how it's easy to give, and harder to notice when the giving has turned into erasure. And I wrote about the day I left. Not to explain. Just to mark it. The day I stopped apologizing for existing. There was no celebration. No audience. Just a plain ticket and a quiet resolve. But it changed everything. One morning, I received a package. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting. Inside was a photograph, Kathleen, standing in a garden, holding a small flower pot with a sprout just barely breaking through the soil. The back of the photo said, "I planted it. Just like you said. Hope it blooms. Love, Kay." I held the photo for a long time. Not crying. Just breathing. Letting the full shape of that love, small, enduring, quietly returning, settle in. I placed the photograph on the bookshelf by the window. Then I made tea. That afternoon, I began organizing my notes. Not for anyone else. Just for myself. Memories, reflections, the pieces of my life that hadn't fit in anyone else's narrative. I began forming chapters. Not a memoir, not exactly. Just, something with a spine. A way to hold it all. I didn't miss the house. Not the physical structure. I missed the memories it held, but those were portable. I carried them here, in the folds of my days. The light through the window in late afternoon reminded me of Sunday evenings back home. The hush that would settle before Russell turned on the radio and started humming along with some old tune. I remembered the way he used to tap his fingers on the arm of the chair, a rhythm no one else noticed. I tapped it sometimes now, unconsciously. One evening, I poured a glass of wine and stepped outside. The sea was quiet, the air cool. I watched the horizon until the sky turned to smoke and silver. And I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for a reply. Not for understanding. Not even for forgiveness. I had moved past the need to be seen. Now, I simply was. I didn't know what the children would do with my silence. Whether they would fill it with guilt, or defensiveness, or perhaps something softer. That was theirs to manage. My life no longer orbited theirs. That, too, was something Russell had prepared me for. Years ago, he'd said, "One day, you'll have to remember who you were before we were a we. Before we were Mom and Dad. Just Lily. You." At the time, I'd laughed. Told him that was too long ago to matter. But now, I understood. She wasn't gone. She was just buried. And here, with lavender blooming and the sound of the chapel bell marking the hours, she had emerged again. I smiled into the quiet and whispered, "Hello." She smiled back. It was mid-April when the first real letter arrived, not a card, not a folded apology from a printer. A real letter. Blue ink. Handwritten. No email backup. No copies sent to siblings. Just a single envelope, postmarked from home, with my name spelled carefully on the front. Lily. Not Mom. Not Mother. Just my name. From Jason. Inside, the paper was thick and folded twice. He had always written with a heavy hand, pressing hard enough that you could feel the grooves beneath each sentence. Dear Mom. It's taken me a long time to figure out what to say, and even longer to figure out what not to say. You're probably tired of us trying to explain ourselves. We've all had plenty of time to reflect, and I'm sure you've heard a dozen versions of regret by now, each of us offering just enough apology to feel less guilty. I can't speak for Laura or Darlene anymore. I'm not even sure we're speaking much to each other these days. I think you cracked something open that none of us have been brave enough to deal with. So I'll just speak for myself. I'm sorry. Deeply. Not in the performative way, not the, "I'm sorry you feel that way," kind of apology. I mean, I'm sorry for how I treated you. How I saw you, or rather, how I didn't. I think part of me believed you were endless. Like a resource. I don't mean that in a cruel way, at least, I didn't think of it as cruelty at the time. But when someone has always been there, always supported, always fixed, always shown up, you start to build your life around that assumption. It becomes structural. You stop checking if the foundation's still strong. You just keep piling on. And I piled on. I watched you grieve Dad and mistook your stillness for confusion. I watched you go quiet and told myself it was weakness. I convinced myself I needed to take control, to be the man Dad would have wanted me to be. But it wasn't about being a man. It was about being a son. A son to a woman who had already been carrying the weight I assumed was mine to shoulder. And instead of asking, I acted. I called realtors. I made decisions. I spoke for you, over you. And then I was surprised when you disappeared. But you didn't disappear, did you? You chose. And now, I'm finally choosing something, too. I'm choosing to be better. Not to earn your return, not to manipulate my way back into your good graces. But to become someone who deserves the kind of love you gave us for so long. Even if you never write back. You don't owe me anything. But if you ever do feel like writing, even just a few lines, I'd like to know how the lavender's doing. Jason. I read it once in the morning light, and again that evening. I didn't cry. I didn't clutch it to my chest or race to respond. I placed it in the wooden box beside my desk, the one Russell used to keep his cufflinks in. There was space for more letters, if they ever came. But I wasn't waiting. Later that week, the lavender bloomed fully, a soft sprawl of color just at the terrace edge. I trimmed a few stems and placed them in a jar near the window. The scent filled the kitchen as I cooked. Simple meals. Enough for one. Enough for now. Sometimes I imagined what it would be like if one of them showed up here. Not with luggage, not with apologies rehearsed in a taxi ride. Just showed up. As themselves. Uncertain. Open. I don't know what I'd say. I used to think I'd confront them. Demand understanding. Now, I thought I might just offer tea. Sit quietly. Let the silence do its work. It's strange how peace rearranges your priorities. There were days when I missed them, not the children they'd become, but the ones they'd been. Jason as a teenager, arguing about curfew but always making it home on time. Laura sitting at the kitchen table, drawing dresses on scraps of old envelopes. Darlene crawling into bed with me during thunderstorms, her hair damp with sleep. But I didn't want those days back. I didn't need to be needed again. Love wasn't a ledger. It didn't need balancing. I'd given what I had. Now I was giving to myself. I enrolled in a language course at the local center, twice a week, evenings. Slow-paced, designed for adults. I met women from Germany, England, Argentina. We fumbled together. Laughed at our mistakes. Shared wine after class once a month. One of them, Marta, invited me to her home for dinner. A narrow white cottage with vines climbing up the sides. Her husband played guitar softly in the corner while we ate lentils and rice and fresh tomatoes with oil and sea salt. No one asked me about my past. They just asked if I liked music. I said yes. They didn't need more than that. After dinner, Marta handed me a small book of poetry, translated into Spanish and English side by side. She said, "Read one line a day. Say it aloud. Let it find a place in your mouth. I took her advice. Each morning, I read a line and repeated it out on the terrace. Not for fluency. For presence. For proof that I still had voice. On Sundays, I began walking to the high cliffs just beyond the chapel. There was a bench there. Wooden, old, worn smooth by salt air and time. It overlooked the rocks and the endless shifting blue of the sea. I started bringing a small notebook. Not to write a book. Not to keep track. Just to notice. The way the sky smells different after it rains. The man in the brown cap who walks his dog at precisely 7:45 every morning. How rosemary in sunlight smells like childhood. I didn't worry about what it meant. I didn't wonder if anyone would ever read it. I was done with living for legacies. I wanted to live for mornings. One afternoon in early May, I received another letter. This one from Kathleen. Her handwriting had changed, still looping, but tighter. More grown up. Still a hint of the girl who used to doodle hearts in the margins. Dear Grandma. I hope this reaches you. Mom said you went away for some time to be alone. I understand that more now. I just wanted you to know I've been thinking about you. I started volunteering at the garden center. The one by campus. They let me take home the herbs that are too scraggly for sale. I've got mint and thyme growing in tin cans on my windowsill. It makes my room smell like you. I remember the way your kitchen smelled in summer. I remember your hands in the soil. The way you said, you can't control what grows, but you can choose to try again. I think about that a lot. I'm sorry if I didn't call enough. If I didn't show you I was listening. But I was. I miss you. I love you. Love. Kathleen. This time, I cried. Just a little. Quietly. No spectacle. Then I sat down and wrote back. Not a long letter. Just a note. Dear Kathleen. Thank you for remembering. I always knew you were listening. Try basil in a bigger pot. And don't forget, rosemary doesn't need much water. Love. Grandma. I mailed it the next morning, and walked home with my hands in my pockets, the sun warm on my shoulders, the breeze scented faintly with salt and dust and rosemary. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt known. And that was enough. The summer arrived slowly, without drama. The village swelled with tourists, their laughter drifting up the narrow streets in the late evenings. But the mornings remained mine. Early walks, coffee in the plaza, the soft hush of shutters opening one by one. Life here unfolded without urgency. No one asked what I had done in the past. No one asked what I was planning next. The present was enough. I'd fallen into a rhythm. On Mondays and Thursdays, I visited the market. On Wednesdays, I attended the language class. Saturdays were for laundry, music, and letters, not always to be sent, sometimes just written and stored in the old biscuit tin I kept in the cabinet. One letter, however, I did send. To Laura. Not out of guilt. Not from pressure. Just because I woke one morning and thought of her, and the thought stayed. Dear Laura. I received your call a while back. I've thought about it more than you know. It's not that I'm punishing anyone. And I'm not looking to be begged or coddled or brought back into the family fold like a prize recovered from the attic. But I am asking for something that I never asked before, space to exist on my own terms. Not as a helper. Not as a planner. Not as a vessel for everyone else's crises. Just as myself. You said you wanted to come sit on my porch and say nothing. That moved me. Because silence, when chosen, is sacred. And I haven't had much of it until now. Perhaps one day you can come. But not yet. Love. Mom. I mailed it at the post office by the chapel. The clerk recognized me now. She always wore a blue cardigan, even in the heat, and gave me 2 stamps without my asking. She smiled when I handed her the letter. No words exchanged. That's what I loved most about this place, the dignity of wordlessness. Back home, the old home, silence had always meant something else. Guilt. Tension. Suppression. Here, silence was trust. A gift. I sat that evening on the terrace with a glass of wine. The wind had picked up a little, soft and cool, brushing over the lavender and lifting the edges of my notebook. I didn't write anything new. I just sat, letting the air move around me, the distant clang of dishes and the occasional church bell reminding me that life continued, even when I paused. I received no reply from Laura. But a week later, a package arrived. A small one. Wrapped in brown paper, tied with a bit of ribbon that looked like it had come from a birthday gift. No note. No return address. But I knew. Inside was a tin, blue and dented, filled with seeds. Labeled in Laura's handwriting. Marigold. Sweet pea. Violet. Nasturtium. From the garden behind the old house. Each packet carefully folded, each label written by hand. It said more than any letter. I spent the next day preparing pots. Not because I needed more plants, but because the gesture deserved planting. I knelt in the dirt, sleeves rolled up, sweat at the back of my neck, and whispered each name as I laid the seeds in their new home. Sweet pea. Violet. Nasturtium. Things I had once taught her to plant. Now return to me. Not all things need to bloom to mean something. The act is enough. Later that afternoon, Marta stopped by. She brought cherries in a paper bag and sat on the step beside me. We didn't talk much. She asked about the plants. I said they were from a daughter. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. Marta's husband had passed 3 years ago. She still wore his ring. She never referred to herself as a widow, just as Marta. I liked that. We shared the cherries, spitting pits into the dirt, laughing once when one bounced off the step and startled her cat. At some point, she reached over and patted my knee. You're more here now, she said in slow, careful English. I looked at her. You used to hold your shoulders like someone was about to call your name. I smiled. No one calls my name here. She nodded. Not needing to be found, that's peace. We finished the cherries in silence. That night, I dreamed of the old kitchen. Not as it was at the end, filled with tension, casseroles no one ate, voices trying too hard to be kind, but as it had once been. Light streaming through the window. Flour on the counter. Darlene singing under her breath while kneading dough. It wasn't a memory so much as a kindness from my mind. I didn't wake up crying. Just thoughtful. In the morning, I made bread. It rose too quickly, and the crust came out harder than it should have, but the scent filled the house and made the day feel full. I wrapped a piece in cloth and brought it to Marta. She handed me a book of Catalan poetry in return. That's how things worked here. No scorekeeping. Just exchange. It reminded me of how I once wanted motherhood to be, a place of quiet offerings, not demands. Later that week, I visited the sea. Sat on the bench by the cliff and wrote nothing. Thought nothing. Just let the wind pass through me, the way water shapes stone, slowly, insistently, without apology. It was then, I realized, that I hadn't thought of Russell in a few days. Not because I was forgetting. Because I was full. He had become a part of the rhythm. The wind, the light, the scent of rosemary. Not a ghost. Just presence. Woven into my peace. I closed my eyes and whispered thank you. Not to anyone. Just to the air. Then I stood, walked home slowly, and watered the seedlings. Most hadn't sprouted. But I didn't mind. It was in late July that I opened the final envelope. I hadn't expected more letters. A part of me thought the children had moved on again, swept back into their orbits of responsibility and performance, managing homes and partners and their own children's demands. Life had a way of recentering itself around the loudest voice in the room. And I was no longer raising mine. But this one came carefully. Laura's handwriting again. More even this time. Less urgency in the strokes. The return address had changed, a smaller town, several hours from the city. I noticed that before I even opened it. And I wondered. Dear Mom. I'm writing from the new place. It's quiet here. Smaller, too. Which is what we needed. I think, maybe, it's what I needed. Not because I'm shrinking, but because I want less noise. You might be surprised, but we moved last month. After everything with you, and some long talks with Andrew that I'd been avoiding for a few years, we decided it was time to stop performing a life and start living one. I kept your letter by my desk the whole time we were packing. Reread it more than I'll admit. I think what struck me most wasn't what you said, it was what you didn't try to do. You didn't try to fix it. You didn't fill the silence with instruction or guilt. You just asked for space. And in doing that, you gave me permission to ask for my own. I've started gardening again. Just a small patch in the back, herbs, mostly, and some wildflowers. Kathleen comes over on Sundays to help me weed. She talks more now. I think seeing you leave, truly leave, shook something loose in her. She's not just watching anymore. She's choosing. We all are. I know this isn't a letter asking you to come back. I won't do that. But if there ever is a time, a summer, a birthday, a season when you feel like visiting, the door is open. There's tea on the stove. Your chair is by the window. Love. Laura. I folded the letter slowly. Pressed it between my palms. I didn't cry, but I felt something soft bloom in my chest, not quite forgiveness, not exactly reconciliation. Something older, deeper. A quiet rhythm resuming. She didn't beg. She didn't apologize again. She simply named a door. And left it open. I spent the next hour dusting the windowsills. Not because they needed it, but because it gave my hands something to do while my heart made sense of the shape it was taking. Later, I took out the small tin of seeds and ran my fingers along each packet. The nasturtiums were growing. The violets had not. And that felt right, somehow. Not everything blooms, not every year. Still, I watered them. I sat beside them in the afternoons and read aloud from the poetry book Marta had lent me. Just a few lines. Just enough to let the air know I was paying attention. On Thursdays, I still went to the market. The woman who sold cheeses started setting aside a small block of soft goat's milk just for me. She didn't ask my name. She called me Señora del Banco, because she'd once seen me sitting on the bench by the chapel and the name stuck. I liked that. I had become someone else here. Not reinvented. Not reborn. Just distilled. I had once been everything to everyone. Then I had become nothing to anyone. Now I was simply me. Sometimes I thought of writing that in a letter, to all three of them. Jason, Darlene, Laura. Just those words. I am simply me now. But I didn't. They would feel it in time, if they chose to. On one quiet morning in August, I took the long path down to the beach, not the public one, but the small cove hidden behind the olive grove. It took more effort to reach. The climb back up always left my knees aching. But the view was mine alone. The water was cool. The breeze carried salt and sun. I sat on a rock and pulled out my notebook. Not to write memories this time. Not reflections. Just facts. My name. My birth date. The 3 places I had called home. The people I had loved, and still did. The things I had learned, slowly, painfully. That silence can be kind. That leaving is not betrayal. That love offered without listening is not love at all. That I am allowed to protect my peace. I tore the page out, folded it once, and buried it beneath a flat stone at the edge of the water. Not a ritual. Not a farewell. Just a reminder. The next week, I heard from Jason again. A card this time. A photo of him and his wife on a hiking trail. On the back, he wrote only. I think I see things more clearly now. Hope Spain is treating you well. J. I smiled. Not because he was changed. But because he was trying. In some ways, they were all still trying to make sense of my leaving. Of the hole I left behind. Not in their schedules, not in their plans, but in their assumptions. I had always been the soft place to land. And when I moved that place, they had to learn to land differently. It wasn't cruelty. It was choice. That Sunday, Marta joined me for supper. We had fresh bread, cheese, olives. She brought wine. We didn't speak much. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You don't hold your breath anymore when someone sits near you." I hadn't noticed. She was right. I had spent years waiting to be asked things gently. Now, I didn't need to be asked at all. At dusk, we watched the sea turn the color of stone. The bells from the chapel rang once. I poured us each a final glass and said, "I think I'm starting to feel done with grieving." Marta looked over and raised her glass. "To being done," she said. "No," I said. "To being full." We clinked glasses. After she left, I sat with the quiet a while longer. Then, I lit a single candle, walked to the garden, and placed it on the stone edge of the flower pots. The nasturtiums had begun to climb. The marigolds bloomed stubbornly, defiantly. They didn't ask permission. They just grew. I understood them more than ever.